Welcome back. Spring training is in full swing in Florida and Arizona, and so are efforts to re-sign the quarterback who led Washington to its first division title in 3 years. A very full sports page. We're delighted to welcome back our friend Tom Threlkeld. He is, of course, editor-in-chief of the DC Pro Sports Report. He's here with analysis. Good to see you, sir, as always.
Thank you.
Let's start with the Nationals, with spring training. A new skipper at the helm in Dusty Baker, but some familiar expectations for a talent-laden roster that we hope, fans hope, just as we did 12 months ago, is built to go into the postseason. We'll see.
Yeah, perhaps more realistic expectations this time than last year.
Tempered by the
tempered by the terrible failure last year when the team was devastated by injuries, but also just really underachieved, and key players who were in the walk years of their contracts just didn't come through. One of them is departed Ian Desmond, the original Nat, the one who was drafted by the Montreal Expos back in 2004, is going on to the Rangers for a one-year deal. Not what he was hoping for, but that's what comes from the season he had last year. Yeah, look, Dusty Baker is taking over. He has typically there's a Dusty Baker effect where he takes over a team and they immediately improve, at least somewhat. Nationals fans have to hope that happens here. He's a relaxed guy, seems to get along with his players, and is trusting Jonathan Papelbon to be the closer again, probably, almost certainly. Look, you know, the Nationals still have a lot of strengths. They still have Max Scherzer. They still have Steven Strasburg. They still have Gio Gonzalez, who's really good some nights and not so good others.
They have an outfielder I've heard who's lighting
They
out.
have a guy named Bryce Harper you might have heard of in right field who's pretty good. That's right. And they brought in a couple of new guys, Ben Revere, an outfielder, and Daniel Murphy, a second baseman. One of the things these guys were intended to do is create more quality at bats. If there's one thing you learn from the playoffs and from the Kansas City Royals, is quality at bats really count. Getting your bat on the ball. Murphy, I think, was the least likely player in Major League Baseball to strike out last season, and I think Revere was the 7th least likely. It was somewhere like that. So guys who get the bat on the ball, and provide a little more balance to a batting lineup that had been sort of overly dependent on right-handed hitters. So that will be helpful. I think what will be key is a couple of things. One is, do some of the young pitchers really come through, like Joe Ross? Could be a big year for Joe Ross. Tanner Roark. Tanner Roark really shined, won 15 games back a couple of years ago, but then when he was moved to the bullpen, he really kind of fell apart, and he wasn't the same. Can he return to his previous standard that we saw in 2014? Another thing is, will they get health? How many games will Jason Worth give them? Can he give them 140 games? It would be very helpful if he could. And how many games will Ryan Zimmerman give them at first base? Zimmerman he hasn't been healthy for a couple of years. The contract that the Nationals gave him now looks very, very bad. And he needs to start living up to it. And job one would be staying on the field. And also, they rebuilt the bullpen. It's been completely rebuilt. They dealt Storin. Stammen is gone, and they're relying on a lot of new guys like Sean Kelly and Yusmeiro Petit and Oliver Perez and Trevor Gott. Will these guys come through for them and give this team, if the starters can get them to 7, can these guys get the last 2 innings? That was a major problem for the Nationals last year, was getting those last 6 outs.
The division was supposed to be a walk last year because the Nationals had all this talent. They had this amazing starting rotation that was supposed to dominate, and the division they were in was supposed to be the weakest in baseball.
Right.
With the Mets surge, I should say, the New York Mets improbable excellence that they displayed, we don't look at the NL East the way we did, and we're all sort of chagrined or circumspect about predictions, including from some of the best, not just hometown people, but national baseball writers had the Nats penciled in as a World Series team. So we're all kind of like, let's just get to October and see. Yeah. But what do you make of the division? How do you assess this division now?
The division continues to improve. I think Atlantic could be better. But I think in the end it'll probably come down to the same 2 teams. Now the Nationals finished, I believe, 7 games behind the Mets last season and really fell apart. I mean, in the last 2 months of the season, the Nationals really fell apart, and the Mets streaked straight ahead. I mean, Yoenis Cespedes was red hot. But the thing about the Mets is they had the pitching staff that the Nationals thought they had. The Mets had the best pitching staff in baseball last year, the starting pitching in particular. But the Mets were too dependent on streaky hitters. Cespedes and in the playoffs, Daniel Murphy. When those guys, when their streak ended, when their hot streak ended, they really couldn't do anything, and we saw what happened when finally in the World Series.
You had to kind of tip your hat though and be admiring of what they were able to do to get to the
absolutely.
World Series. Crazy.
Nobody, I don't know of anybody who picked the Mets to win the pennant. So it was a remarkable performance, and I think the Nationals are and should be properly respectful of the Mets. When you look at that Mets team, they still look like a better pitching staff to me. And I think they look like a better pitching staff to most people than what is here in Washington. Washington has a strong pitching staff, but I don't think it's as good. What they're going to need this year is more balance. They need more hitting, more offensive consistency. There was just weeks and weeks last year where if it wasn't Bryce Harper, there was nothing on offense, and that can't continue. And that's why they went out and got guys like Daniel Murphy. There's got to be more help for Harper. It can't be him hitting 40 some odd home runs and only 99 RBIs. Guys have got to get on base in front of him.
I want to shift gears in a moment and talk about Kirk Cousins, but before we do, last year Matt Williams was accused by a lot of fans and pundits of paint by numbers managerial style. Yeah. What do you expect from Dusty Baker?
Well, I think because there's a new bullpen, I think there'll be some shakedown time, and so he'll be looking to see which are the arms that he can really rely on in which situations. I don't think they know exactly who their eighth inning setup guy is going to be. They need to find out who their long reliever is going to be. I mean, there are some obvious candidates, but I don't think it's locked down yet. Now, the real games start this week, and they're going to go 3 straight weeks playing a game every day. So they'll learn something then. But I think when the real games start, it'll take some time. But I think that so far, Jonathan Papelbon is still your closer, like it or not. And I know a lot of Nats fans don't like it, but he is the most reliable guy. Baker has been around a long time and is much less he has much more managerial experience than Williams, who was inexperienced when he came to Washington. He may be more confident in his own decisions, less willing to look at a rule book. Baker can look back on 20 years of managing teams and taking 7 teams to the playoffs and saying, I know what works. I don't need to refer to any rule book. I got my own rule book right up here.
Let's talk about Kirk Cousins. We know several things that have always been true, but coming out of this past season, it seems like the lens is that much sharper. There aren't that many good quarterbacks. B, there are a lot of terrible and mediocre quarterbacks. C, you don't get very far unless you have one of the top 10 arms, and let's factor the brain, the ability to read defenses and all that into it as well. If you don't have a top quarterback, just forget going anywhere. You're going to be in the 8-8 realm or worse. And lastly, Kirk Cousins had an amazing year, a breakout year, and for him personally, terrific timing for that to have occurred.
Yeah.
To what extent has all of this complicated Washington's re-signing of the guy who led them to the division last year?
It's really complicated. This is what happens when players do great things in their contract season. A few years ago, in 2012, the last time before last season that Washington had a good team, Joe Flacco was a quarterback of the Baltimore Ravens. He took them. They won a Super Bowl. That was his contract year. He cashed in with a $100 million contract. Now, if you look at Joe Flacco, does he look like a $100 million quarterback to you? He doesn't look like that to me. But he was really good when it counted, and that's what matters. And this, as you pointed out, this is a quarterback-starved league. And you saw that the teams that made the playoffs last year had good quarterback play apart from Houston. And we saw what happened to Houston in the playoffs.
Good point.
They had to have a great defense and the greatest, arguably the best football player in the world to get there in J.J. Watt. But when they got to the playoffs, they were humiliated in one of the worst playoff performances any team has ever had in NFL history. So you need the quarterback. There is a huge amount of leverage for Kirk Cousins. The fact is, he picked a great time to be great, and that's how it works. Now, when fans look at this and they hear like $20 million a year for Kirk Cousins, and their eyes bug out, says, how can this guy possibly be worth it? What I would tell them is, this is the new economics of the NFL. The league is flush with money. The cap is going up $10 million a year, and that decides what guys are going to get paid. And the fact is, quarterbacks get paid. If guys like Ryan Tannehill and Jay Cutler very mediocre quarterbacks who are not nearly as good as Cousins last year are earning $18 million a year. You can see why Cousins is saying, I want 20.
And the unusual fact of the matter is the team that just won the Super Bowl is now in the market for a quarterback.
That's
as
right.
Amazing and unusual as that is, that's where we'll pick up on the other side of the break. We'll step aside here, back though with more of our conversation with Tom Strelfeld of the DC Pro Sports Report right after this. Keep it here.